Good day to everyone. Our topic is the physiological basis of behavior. We come to know objects in the outside world through our receptors or sense organs. Sometimes one sensory receptors and sometimes another is dominant. But most often impressions are gained through more than one sense avenue. The expert looking at a picture in art gallery, the music lover listening to a symphony over the radio, the connoisseur sipping a rare old wine, the athlete flexing a sore muscle, each of these is utilizing one sense predominantly. Thus a stimuli may be a football game, visual, a radio program, auditory, an ice cream soda, visual and gustatory, or a question posed by a friend, verbal. When the sensitivity of our receptors is lost or greatly diminished, as in partial or total blindness, for example, another receptors are called upon to perform double duty. As a consequence of increased practice and greater concentration of attention, the sensitivity of the remaining receptors may seem to be greatly enhanced. An organism, man or other animal, responds or reacts to a multiplicity of stimuli. The organs of response, muscles, and glands are called effectors. Between the receptors and the effector and within the body itself, the brain and central nervous system serve as a selective connecting mechanism. Because of this threefold division into receptors, connector, and effector, human behavior is often like to the action of a telephone exchange. Incoming calls stimuli being switched over through the brain and nervous system and sent out of over appropriate outgoing lines to their destination. Muscle and glands. This is an oversimplification to be sure, but it serves to indicate the importance of the central station and to illustrate the point that the response which follows stimulus is determined as much by the organism as by the stimulus, perhaps even more so. The sensory receptors. Traditionally, man is said to possess five senses: seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and feeling or touch. On the contrary, it contains four separate sensory receptors: for touch or pressure, for warmth, for cold, and for pain. Of the different senses, sight and hearing are often called the higher senses because of their transcendent importance in everyday life. By far the greater part of what we learn in school, in business, and in social relationship comes to us by way of the eye and the ear. The person with impaired sense of touch or taste is handicapped, to be sure, but by no means so drastically as it's the person who is blind or deaf. The purpose of this section is to show how through our receptors we gain knowledge of ourselves and of the wide variety of things in the world around us. Sense perception is of crucial importance in human behavior, since without the basic data which its bring life would lose most if not all of its richness and meaning. Number 1. The eye. Light rays entering the eye through the circular opening, called the pupil or focus by the lens, which lie just behind the pupil upon the sensitivity inner surface of the eye, called the retina. From the retina, nervous impulses reach the brain over the optic nerve and are translated into visual perceptions. The mechanism of the eye may be compared roughly to that of a camera. An expander or contracting to admit more or less light, the pupil corresponds to the camera's adjustable diaphragm by moving the lens farther away from or closer to the sensitivity plate. In the eye, this adjustment is made by a thinning or thickening of the lens, the distance of the lens from the retina remaining constant. The world is seen by a totally colorblind, a partially colorblind, and a normal eye. And these pictures looks like some important facts in visual perception. Number 1 is how we see color. Visual experience of color may be classified according to hue, brightness, and saturation. The hue are the reds, greens, orange, and purples, and other familiar colors. The brightness is a matter of the intensity of the visual experience. brightness range from pitch darkness to blind glare. A given color, blue for instance, may be very bright or very dull. That is, it may vary in brightness over a wide range. Artists sometimes use the terms tint and shade to refer to colors that are somewhat lighter or somewhat darker than the color as ordinarily seems. And saturation is a matter of the richness of amount of color present in the hue. The larger the amount of white present, the lower the saturation. A blue may be a deep navy blue, may have such saturation, or it may be a washed-out or faded sky blue and have little saturation. And number 2, the color mixture. A good deal of the information concerning color vision has been gleaned from experiments in which colored lights were mixed on a color wheel. Cardboard discs or different colors, for example red and green, are fitted together on the color wheel to form a circle. The sector or degree of red or green can be varied from one half to any fraction of the total circle. When the color wheel is rotated, the sensitivity cells of the retina are stimulated rapidly and in succession, first by one color and then by the other if rotation is slow. A marked alternation of color, called flicker, occurs as the speed of the wheel increases. Flicker is replaced by a steady and uniform hue. 3 laws of color mixture have been formulated from color wheel experiments. Number 1. For every color, another can be found which, when mixed with the first in the right proportion, yields white or a neutral gray. For example, yellow and blue sectors can be so adjusted as to give gray, as can red and blue-green sectors, such as pairs of colors are called complementary. 2. The mixing of two colors which are not complementary results in color or intermediate hue. Red and yellow give orange, blue and green give a blue-green. If when mixed on the wheel, two separate this combination give the same color sensation. This will in turn give the same color sensation when all four are mixed together. Thus, if a certain yellow and blue mixture yields a neutral gray, and a certain red and green mixture gives the same gray, these four, when mixed together, will give the gray obtained in the separate mixture. Number 3. The color blindness. People who do not possess the normal ability to distinguish color or who are said to be colorblind. Color blindness results from a lack of certain retinal cells, or from a lack of certain light-sensitive substances in the retinal cells. Night-prowling animals such as the cat are totally colorblind. The bee and perhaps other insects can see two colors, yellow and blue, while birds and most mammals apparently see all colors. Color blindness or color weakness occurs infrequently in women, but it is found in varying degrees in 6 to 7% of men. Total lack of color vision is very rare in man, the most common form of blindness being the inability to distinguish red from green. A colorblind man tells a dark red tie from a light green tie most by brightness and saturation difference. The red tie will be matches or hue against a muddy yellow-brown, the green against a light or dull blue. When red and green traffic lights are mixtures, the red and yellow red and the green are bluish green. The colorblind driver can tell one from the other by hue, without having to rely upon brightness and saturation. Colorblindness is an occupational hazard for railroad engineers and for pilots, and it is distinct handicap to the dry goods salesman and others who must work with color materials in their business or profession. A general rule of visual sensitivity arising from a deficiency of vitamin A is found in night blindness, a condition in which the eye adaptation to low illumination is so poor that objects in a dim light can barely be distinguished. Night blindness is sometimes relieved by the addition of vitamin A to the diet, but it does not appear the color blindness can be alleviated to any considerable extent by the administration of vitamins. Number 4. Adaptation and contrast. Many factors in brightness and color vision contribute to visual perceptions. One is the phenomenon of adaptation to brightness. If we go out into the bright sunlight from a dimly lighted theater, at first we do not see things clearly. But in a short time, our eyes become adapted to the increased illumination and objects appear as they normally do. Color vision is not as good under lowered illumination as it is in ordinary daylight. In twilight, for example, red appears somewhat darker and blues somewhat brighter, while green is brighter even than yellow, ordinarily the brightest color. Knowledge gained through experience keeps us from making many errors when perceiving colors under twilight illumination. A red coat looks brighter in sunshine than it does in shade, but it is still unmistakable red. Our ability to identify colors correctly in spite of illumination change is called color constancy. Color constancy demonstrates the fact that our perceptions are not determined solely by the sensory experience. According to the first law of color mixture, certain colored lights, when mixed in proper proportion, give a neutral, white-gray sensation, such as color pairs are called complementary. Number 5. Physiological factors in distance and depth. A physiological cue to the distance is provided by the size of the retinal image. A man a block away casts upon the retina an image much smaller than a man in the same room. Since we know from the past experiences how large men are relatively, we interpret the small man not as dwarf but as man far away. Young children, however, often confuse size and distance. Another important physiological cue to distance as well as to depth perception, three-dimensional space, is the fact that image of objects cast upon the retinas of the two eyes differ slightly. The space between the two eyes called the anterocular distance is approximately 3 inches, so that the right and the left eye see objects from slightly different angle. The fusion of these retinal pictures give us a perception of three-dimensional space. Number 6. Psychological factors in distance and depth. Psychological cues to distance and depth are just important as are physiological factors. Perhaps even more so, among physiological factors may be mentioned superposition, perspective, variation in lighting, shadows, shade in color, and relative size. Two of these, perspective and relative size, can also be classified as physiological or partially so. Number A. Superposition. If a parked automobile obscures the side of the house, we immediately infer that the automobile stands between us and the house, which is partly covered. The superposition of people against buildings, of one building against another, and of trees and houses against a mountain range provide valuable cues to distant perception. And letter B is perspective. Small objects are usually interpreted as far away. Larger objects are nearby. All of us have seen that as we look down a railroad track, a rail seems to converge at a point far away. The space between the rails appears to be much smaller at a distance that it is on our feet, but we interpret this convergence to mean distance, not an actual meeting of the rails. The decrease in the size of objects as they move away and their increase in size as they come nearer are employed by artists to represent relative distance. Letter C. Variation in lighting's shadows. Shading colors artists and stage directors depend to a considerable extent upon lighting and shade to represent distance and depth. Hearing, the ear. Sound waves entering the ear through the external opening pass through a series of interlocking bones to the inner ear, where sensory receptor cells pick up the vibration when the nerve impulses from these cells are carried over the auditory nerve to the brain center. We hear sound waves or ordinary vibration of the air, but sounds can be carried by various other media. For instance, in the open country, the approach of the train may be detected by listening to the vibration of the rails or long before any other sounds, except the whistle or horn can be heard through the air. When the normal process of hearing is interfered with, one can often hear through the bones of the head. The sense of for taste and smell. Special sensory receptors or taste buds located upon the tongue and within the surface of the mouth area enable us to taste substances placed in the mouth. It will come as a surprise to many to learn that there are only four elementary taste sensations: sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. The great variety of tastes which we all experience are in reality blends mixture of two or more elementary tastes plus contributes of smell, temperature, touch, and even pain. The taste of orange aid, for example, is a compound of sweet, bitter, and cold plus a characteristic orangey odor. So well blended is the combination. However, that ordinary we never analyze it, although we have no difficulty in identifying it immediately. The sensory receptors for smell are located high up in the nasal cavity, as is true of taste. The number of distinct odors is few. In fact, there are probably not more than 6 elementary odors in spite of multiplicity of smell which daily assail our nostrils. These primary odors are described as spicy, cloves, number 2, fragrant, violet or rose, ethereal or fruity, orange or lemon, resinous, turpentine or pine needles, putrid, rotten eggs or decaying fish, and burnt tarry substance or scorched coffee grounds. Most of the odors which we perceive in everyday life are combination in various strengths of these 6 primary odors. Furthermore, just most odors and tastes are blends, so flavor is a compound of smell and taste. If the nose is tightly plugged so that the receptors for smell are cut off, a blindfolded person cannot tell whether the substance placed on this tongue is a slice of potato, onion, or apple. Most of have experienced the loss of taste which results from a severe head cold.